You're listening to the Oddscast, the original UFC betting podcast that's straight to the point. Hosted by leading MMA oddsmaker Nick Kalikas and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. They provide you the absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting. MMAOddsBreaker.com. Don't place your wagers without us.
Welcome to the Oddscast, presented by BetDSI. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC on ESPN Plus 3 event, which takes place in Prague, Czech Republic. If you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, Kyle Marley lost 1.82 units for his 1-unit free bet from UFC on ESPN on Cain Velasquez at minus 182 odds. Kyle has his bets and fantasy MMA picks available now on MMAOddsBreaker.com. Back to the present, UFC on ESPN Plus 3 features a 13-fight card in total and will be aired on ESPN2 and ESPN Plus this Saturday afternoon. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off on ESPN2 is a lightweight contest between Damir Ismagulov, who is 17-2, and Joel Alvarez, who is 15-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Ismagulov opened minus 270, the comeback on Alvarez at plus 190. Right now, looking over at our sponsored sportsbook, betdsi.eu. Currently at BetDSI, we have Ismagulov at minus 300, the comeback on Alvarez at plus 235. So line margins have tightened up a little bit, and there is two-way action coming into this fight. Slightly a little bit more action coming in on the favorite here. I'm sure he's getting thrown in some parlays as well, Ismagulov. I mean, you know, there's a lot of unknowns with Alvarez, honestly. And Ismagulov is one of these solid veterans, still young at age 28, and he's got a lot of experience in Europe, former M1 champion. So, man, he came into the UFC making his debut already pretty much established and a little bit of hype behind him as well. And then he comes in and just wins a clear decision over Gorgies in his debut. So I think he was impressive there. So this guy's got a really solid start to his UFC career in the lightweight division. He's facing a game opponent, though, in Alvarez. I mean, like I said, a lot of unknowns, I think, overall to the MMA community and the betting community out there about Alvarez, but he's a pretty solid fighter. I mean, he's tall for the lightweight division, has some length. Despite having 14 of 15 wins by submission, the guy actually has some pretty decent stand-up skill as well. He loves to throw some kicks. He's effective with those kicks as well. He's got a little bit of power with his punches, but make no mistake, I mean, on the ground is where he gets it done, and he's got those long limbs, and he gives people problems. He's even the type of guy that will pull guard to get the fight to the floor if he has to. His wrestling's okay, but against Ismagulov, I don't think it's going to have a lot of success doing so. So he's going to have to probably, try his best to be smart to get this fight to the ground and work his stand-up skill, though, along the way. Because I think even though, again, Alvarez specializes at finishing his opponents by submission, I mean, I think this is going to be pretty competitive on the feet. These guys can both mix it up. Ismagulov likes to go for takedowns. He's got a good wrestling base as well. He drops some nasty ground and pound once he has you in position. So that's what he's going to probably look to do here. Mix everything up a little bit, maybe use his boxing and try to keep Alvarez standing a little bit and see how much success he has there. If he feels like taking it to the ground, I think he's capable of doing so. But again, he has to watch out because Alvarez is a very keen submission fighter, and that's where he likes to play the most. So this is an intriguing fight. I think Alvarez has a lot of potential as well. And again, Ismagulov off to a very good start, as I said. So both these guys, I think, belong on this roster, and they're going to win some fights on this, the lightweight division. So for this particular fight, I like the way Ismagulov matches up with him. I think he could probably avoid getting subbed out of his 18 or so, 19 fights that he's had, I believe. He's never been submitted. So I think that continues here, and he probably grinds out a very game opponent in a debuting Alvarez. So the pick is Ismagulov to get a solid win over, like I said, a very good opponent.
Yeah, this is kind of the battle of the wrestler against the submission artist that is dangerous off of his back. So this is a really interesting battle because Ismagulov, for the most part, likes to utilize his wrestling and ground and pound and top position, while Alvarez, if you actually look at his track record, I mean, he has a ridiculous amount of submission finishes, and almost all of them are either guillotines or triangle chokes. So, from his back, he is very dangerous. So, I'm basically going to be glued to this one from the beginning of the fight to the end because it could finish at a moment's notice if Alvarez is able to lock something in against Ismagulov, or if Ismagulov leaves his neck out shooting in for a takedown. That just makes it really, really intriguing. But where Ismagulov also has some advantages here is I think he has a little bit better striking game. He is going to be able to push this fight into the clinch, where Alvarez's submission game is not going to be nearly as effective. So I think Ismagulov clearly has the edge here. Those Russian grinders that can push through things, it's a lot tougher, it feels like, to submit these guys. And almost every one of Alvarez's victories has come on the European regional scene, and it's just not quite as stiff a competition as what Ismagulov faced on the Russian scene, and then now coming to the U.S. for UFC and performing at a high level. So I just think Ismagulov's a little bit higher tier fighter, but Alvarez is definitely intriguing moving forward, but this is a very tough UFC debut for him. So I'm going to side with Ismagulov. I think he gets the job done, primarily due to that grappling and avoiding Alvarez's sneaky submissions off of his back. Now, sticking with the lightweight division, we have a pair of veterans squaring off as Rustam Khabilov, who is 23-3, takes on Diego Ferreira, who is 14-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Khabilov opened minus 145, the comeback on Ferreira plus 105. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's Khabilov minus 150, the comeback on Ferreira plus 120. So again, line margins have tightened up, and there is two-way action coming into this fight. Khabilov only increasing by 5 cents or so. There's going to be continuing money flowing in both ways, I think, in this fight as well, because you got two very respectable fighters, again, in the lightweight division that have very solid wins and kind of nice runs going on in the lightweight division. And again, guys that could come in here and just get it done that I think are a higher level lightweights, honestly, on the roster. And it's kind of surprising they matched them up. I think this is an intriguing fight. Of course, Khabilov is one of these guys that, utilizes that wrestling, that crazy grinding style that he has, a suplex game that he's kind of went away from, honestly, as of late. We don't see as many suplexes, but that's what he's about. He's about kind of getting the fight to the floor, controlling you, kind of ragdolling you when he can, and just grinding you out. Now, he does have, obviously, some pretty decent stand-up. That's been developing. It's getting better throughout his career, so he's no slouch even standing. But, make no mistake, again, he's the ultimate grinder. He's the one that's going to control you and kind of, get the scorecards on you at least, maybe even finish you on the way. So he's a very solid fighter, has a lot of impressive wins, and he continues to kind of roll, even in close competitive decisions. I have seen a drop off, though, I got to say, in his performances as of late. I think these fights are getting more and more competitive for him. So I think he has kind of dropped off a bit. And that's unfortunate because, man, he's going to have to be game here against Ferreira. Ferreira, again, is another one of these guys that's very well rounded. He's dangerous everywhere the fight takes place, man. This guy's a finisher. He can beat you on the feet. He can beat you on the ground as well. He's got underrated wrestling, but he has been put on his back. We've seen, issues in the past with him getting beat that way as well. So Khabilov is going to probably come in, play the stand-up game a little bit and see how that goes, and then again try to look to put Ferreira on his back. But he's got to be careful. Ferreira has a mean guillotine choke. He's got some nice reversals and just a wicked overall ground game. And on the feet, I think Ferreira is far more dangerous as well. He's going to be throwing some big punches, and he's a type of fighter sometimes, Ferreira, that just kind of throws without caring. He's a little careless at times, which is a mistake, and you got to be cautious because, defensively, obviously that's cost him in the past a little bit and it could cost him again. But in this case and against Khabilov, I don't think he has to be as concerned with something like that. So I think he's going to be coming out throwing some bombs on the feet, and I think that's where it's going to be dangerous for Khabilov here. And I think Ferreira, even on the ground, matches up fairly well with him. I think that he'll be able to sprawl, avoid some of the takedown attempts from Khabilov. Maybe if he does get put on his back, probably get a reversal along the way as well. So I think I kind of lean towards Ferreira in this matchup. Again, I think it's more that I think Ferreira is slowly improving, finally hitting his groove a little bit in the UFC. He had a pretty tough fight even in his last fight. He fought a very, I guess, unknown fighter to most out there, and Kyle Nelson. But Kyle Nelson's a very game fighter. You're going to see him moving forward. He'll get another fight in the UFC and he'll probably do well. So Kyle Nelson started that fight off really well, but Ferreira adapted, did what he had to do, and ended up finishing that fight in the second round. So that was probably more impressive than people realize as well. So that's the type of fighter Ferreira is. He's getting better. He's getting more confident. His ability to finish the fight is just there, man. So you got to be respecting that if you're Habilov for sure. So this is, again, kind of a head scratcher type of fight. I could see it playing out so many different ways, but to me right now, I lean a little bit more towards Ferreira because I do like what I've seen from him more than Habilov lately. So the pick is Ferreira to get the win over a very game and respectable opponent, Habilov.
Habilov is on like the quietest 6-fight win streak in the UFC that I've ever seen. I mean, granted, it's not against elite competition. It's been against steady competition, but it feels like the UFC is just not really testing and pushing this guy right now. So he's been very stagnant despite the win streak, and it's understandable because, he really hasn't been an exciting fighter for a while. When he debuted, he was tossing guys on their heads. But then he lost those 2 fights in a row, and he hasn't quite been the same. He's had, 7 straight decisions. So, it's just, he hasn't really pushed, it doesn't seem like. Against Ferreira, this should be a really intriguing battle because Ferreira, I believe, is going to be the more aggressive, active striker with a little bit of a pop in his hands. Ferreira has a lethal ground game. Now, he doesn't have Habilov's wrestling base, so I don't think Ferreira is going to be, jumping on Habilov, taking this to the floor and then, grappling him in circles. But I do think that Ferreira's not going to be afraid to throw down here, and that's what is really intriguing to me because Habilov, how much is he really going to want to be shooting in and taking this to the floor? Because Ferreira is a very dangerous ground fighter. We've seen him put on some grappling clinics in the past, particularly against guys like Ovince St. Preux, or not Ovince St. Preux, but Aubin Mercier. So, I've been very impressed with, the recent run of, Ferreira. It seems like he's been invigorated and he's going out there and he's been taking on some tough guys and he's been taking them out. So, against Habilov, this is definitely the biggest step up in competition Ferreira's had since he fought Dustin Poirier. And obviously that one didn't go very well for him, but, I think he's, really adjusted and improved. And this is a ripe opportunity because, Habilov has still that name value. He's headlined a UFC event before. And Ferreira, I think that he can push the pace. I think that he is going to set the tone on the feet. I think that he'll be the aggressor on the feet. So I expect him to win the stand-up exchanges. I think he's going to be, it's going to be exciting on the feet, at least from his perspective. And I think that he'll make, Habilov hesitate a little bit with, looking for takedowns because if he does, he's going right into Ferreira's biggest strength. So yeah, I think, this is a winnable fight for Ferreira. And I think that he actually does pull this out. So, Carlos Diego Ferreira is going to be my pick. Now, moving up to the welterweight division, we have Michel Prazeres, who is 26-2, taking on UFC newcomer Ismail Nardiev, who is 18-2. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Prazeres opened -400. The comeback on Nardiev at +280. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's -430 for Prazeres. The comeback on Nardiev at +320. So line margins have tightened up a little bit, a little bit more action coming in Prazeres' way. Again, a lot of that's going to be parlayed material, I'm sure. Man, Prazeres is just an absolute tank of a man. Even moving up to welterweight, it's amazing what he's done, in my opinion, facing very solid competition and just running through a very strong opponent in Fabinski. Whether fans out there respect them or not, I mean, that was a pretty solid win, and the way he just ran right through him was very impressive. Beating Zach Cummings, which I respect a lot. I think he's a very underrated fighter. Another very solid win. So, man, I've underestimated Prazeres many times throughout his career. He's faced a lot of good fighters, and I thought, man, all right, this is going to be the fight that, he has a setback and he doesn't perform up to par or whatnot. And he's overperformed each and every time. He surprised me. This guy is definitely improving. This guy is very well rounded. You have to respect every aspect of Prazeres' game. I mean, typically speaking, we think of him as kind of more of your grinding again. type of, wrestler, jiu-jitsu practitioner that's going to get this fight to the floor and just kind of grind you out and submit you if he can. But man, on the feet, you got to respect this guy too. He's just, like I said, a little tank. I mean, he throws some bombs. He has some speed. He's got some power. He's effective with the striking. He can hurt you on the feet and then, chase you to the ground and finish you off there as well. He's becoming more of a finisher. We've seen that lately. So Prazeres, again, I've been nothing but impressive. I've underestimated the guy, honestly, throughout his career thus far. And I just think this guy's an absolute stud. That being said, he's got another tough fight here in Nardiov. I think that, in this bout here, we're seeing a debuting young man. He's only 22 years old in Nardiov. And I think that he's a very capable fighter that's got a lot of experience already, quality fights, actually. I mean, being outside of the UFC and again, kind of an unknown, in many aspects, I think this guy has put together an impressive run against okay competition that's going to kind of help him already have a step on, most that come into the UFC debuting with padded resumes. This guy definitely has faced some decent competition throughout. Again, not quite UFC level competition, but I mean, he's got some respectable wins on his resume. So that said, this guy's a pretty solid fighter. He's more of a striking based fighter for sure. He loves to throw a lot of kicks in his game. He's very effective with those. He's fast. He's strong. He's very aggressive, like I said, with that killer instinct as well. So there's a lot to like about him. But beyond being a really good, accurate striker that's very dangerous and capable of knocking you out with his hands or his feet, I mean, the guy actually has a little bit of wrestling and a little bit of a ground game as well. So he's pretty well rounded. But again, I mean, he's stepping in here, making his UFC debut over a gentleman I just described as just an absolute tank that's well-rounded and just running through opponents. So this is a tough fighter to face in your debut. So that's why you're seeing such a big number here. I mean, Nardiov is honestly, like I said, I think he's a very capable fighter. And this is going to be dangerous for Prazeres early on because, I mean, the way his aggressiveness and his technique is clean kicks coming at you with some power. I mean, Prazeres is going to have to close that gap and try to utilize, strike on the inside a little bit, get the takedown, I think, and get this fight to the floor and probably try to submit Nardiov on the ground to win this fight. So that's the game plan here, and it's going to be a risky game plan of that, but I think it's another fight that Prazeres can accomplish the win. I mean, like I said, I know a lot of people probably aren't going to see this upset happening here, but I like I said, I wouldn't count him out, man. And Nardiov is going to come in game. He's going to come into he'll know what to expect here. He'll know Prazeres is coming to take him down. So let's see how prepared he is. He can be put on his back. I think that is going to be his kryptonite in this fight, and I think Prazeres is going to find a way to win this fight that way as well. So Prazeres keeps his run going here with another impressive quality win here at UFC on ESPN +3.
Yeah, this is an intriguing matchup, and Prazeres has really impressed me since moving up to 170, and he had to because he kept missing weight really bad at 155, but he hasn't missed a beat since moving up a weight class. You'd think that the 15 extra pounds and him not really being the biggest, tallest welterweight would be an issue, but it hasn't. I mean, he's still just pushing forward and grinding out people, or as evidenced in his last fight, just blowing right through them. I mean, he took on Fabinski, a guy that is, you would think would be one of his biggest issues, somebody that's bigger and stronger and uses a similar style to take fights to the ground and beat people up on the canvas. And Prazeres just completely ran through Fabinski like a knife through hot butter and got a stoppage victory in like barely a minute. So, I mean, he is just getting more and more dangerous. So now, Prazeres has taken on, Nardiov, and Nardiov is a talented fighter. I mean, 22 years old. He's already got, he's on a 16 fight stoppage streak for his wins. I mean, he is a very, very impressive fighter, and he's going to be a lot bigger than Prazeres. He's 6 inches taller. He's going to have, I think, a 7-inch reach advantage. But I don't think it matters because, Nardiov, while he is extremely talented and he can finish fights on the feet, he can finish fights with submissions. He's at his best when he's the one pressing forward, when he's the aggressor. And Prazeres just does not take steps backwards when he fights. Prazeres is moving forward. He's swinging hard. And that the second he gets an opponent to hesitate or back into the fence, or just if he sees an opening, I mean, he's shooting in and closing the distance and trying to get fights to the floor. And when he gets fights to the floor, he is absolutely smothering. He wears people down, or he can get submissions. So, Prazeres is a really intriguing and dangerous fighter. And I mean, he is on quite a streak right now, dating back to his run in the lightweight division as well. So, I've been very, very impressed with Prazeres. I really thought that he would fall off when he moved up to welterweight, and it just hasn't happened. So, Nardiev here is extremely talented, and I actually think this guy's going to have a very successful UFC career, especially with his young age. He's nicknamed the Austrian Wonder Boy. And at 22 years old, yeah, he has a bright future, but, he's stepping in here on short notice. And I just think this is a really bad stylistic matchup for him. I mean, maybe he catches Prazeres coming forward, but, like I said, Nardiev really isn't at his best when he's on his back foot, and Prazeres is going to continuously force Nardiev to be fighting off of his back foot the whole fight, whether it's on the feet or on the ground. So I think Prazeres utilizes that top control, that constant pressure, and either wins by decision or potentially submission. So Prazeres is going to be my pick. Now, dropping back down to the lightweight division, we have Damir Hadzovic, who is 12-4, taking on Marco Polo Reyes, who is 7-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Reyes opens minus 135, Hadzovic minus 105. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's exactly a pick, minus 115 either way. So line margins have tightened up, more action coming in the dog's way. And Hadzovic, a little surprised because, typically speaking, Hadzovic, I think overall in the MMA community and the bettors out there, doesn't get a whole lot of love. But that said, I think he deserves to get some because I think the guy's a very solid fighter. He's coming off of an impressive, close-fought competitive win over Nick Hein. And I think obviously that's by far the best win of his career in the UFC. I mean, I think Marcin Held was probably a little bit bigger, but Held's not, no longer on the roster or whatnot as well. And, that was kind of a comeback situation there. But that said, still a lot to be said for Hadzovic. I think he's been underrated, and I like what I see with this guy. I mean, he's a very complete fighter. He's got a lot of skill. He's been working on his ground defense, which I think is probably still his kryptonite, getting taken down and controlled by fighters more so than anything else. But he's got better takedown defense than most people would think. That said, on the feet, this guy's a killer, man. I mean, he has a lot of power. He's got good technique. He's smart. He's got accuracy. So he's no slouch on the feet at all. Now, defensively, though, he is a bit concerning, I should say, because I think, at times, he lets punches get through more so than you'd like to see. And against Reyes, that is definitely a concern because Reyes has a ton of power. Reyes is one of these guys, again, for me, I think that I've been impressed with as well. I mean, obviously, coming in, he's an Ultimate Fighter Latin America Season 2, I believe, veteran. He fared, okay throughout the season. He made a name for himself with that big power that he does possess. And then outside of that, I think when he finally got into the UFC, man, he's looked nothing but impressive. The guy's getting better. So he's more than just a power puncher that we're all used to. This guy's actually turned into a pretty solid mixed martial artist overall. But to make no mistake, the highlight of his fighting style is definitely, that big punching power that he has. So this is going to be an awesome fight. I mean, both these guys come to stand and bang and lay people out, and they're more than capable of doing this. So, I mean, if the first person that leaves that opening or makes that first mistake can definitely see their lights being put out here. But from a betting perspective, I do like, I said, or the early action that came out of Hadzovic, I do like that side. I think that that's probably the way to go. I think he's the more complete mixed martial artist at this stage. And I think, if his defense holds up and he doesn't eat one of those big bombs, I think eventually he'll land his and get through and probably put Reyes out. If this fight continues to go on, I think Hadzovic takes over. He might be able to get this fight to the ground and use his offensive wrestling. And I think he still has a big edge as far as the ground goes over Reyes as well. So I just think that he is the more complete fighter. I think both these guys are extremely dangerous, like I said, on the feet. And I like his chances anywhere this fight takes place. So I do like Hadzovic. I'm going to pick him to win this fight, even though I do respect Reyes. Like I said, he's a very dangerous opponent. So this should be a fun fight to watch.
Yeah, I expect this fight to be extremely entertaining. I mean, Hadzovic and Reyes are both guys that are aggressive and dangerous on the feet. And Reyes, to me, though, is just a little bit more intriguing. I mean, so far, Reyes has gone 4-1 inside the octagon, and that includes a fight against Matt Frevola about a year ago that, I mean, he just steamrolled through a guy that is really talented. And I did not expect it to go that way. I thought Frevola was going to make a really impressive UFC debut, and Reyes knocked him out in 1 minute. Now he hasn't fought since then. He had a USADA suspension, but he served it. He's back, and now he's taken on Hadzovic. And Hadzovic really has not had the best run inside the octagon. I mean, he was not looking that great in his fight against Marcin Held, and then right at the end, in the third round, he blasts him with the knee and gets the win. But before that, he got smoked by Mirbek Taisimov. He lost that decision to Alan Petrick after the Held win, and then, barely pulled out a split decision over Nick Hine most recently. So I really, other than that knee that he landed against Held in a fight he was losing, that's really been the highlight of his UFC career so far. And I just don't feel like he's been fighting to his potential. And I don't think that maybe Reyes will force him to fight to his potential, because this is going to be a slugfest, and Reyes pushes that kind of tempo, and he's going to force Hadzovic to engage. And you're just going to find out who's the better striker here, or at least the luckiest striker, because these guys are going to be throwing down. Both guys have been knocked out before, so, neither has a complete granite chin. Both guys have power. I just think that Reyes is a little bit more aggressive, a little crazier in there. I think he'll be throwing at a higher rate. And I think Hadzovic will be be forced to play catch up a little bit. And I think that's a tough way to fight it. He's really not as much of a counter striker. So I really like Paulo Reyes. I think that aggression and volume game is going to help. And if Reyes doesn't knock out Hadzovic, I think he definitely wins a decision, because at least that aggression will play out. I mean, we've seen Reyes in some absolute barn burners in the past that he was able to pull out. So I think that this actually plays to his advantage to be in an aggressive brawl type of situation. So Marcos Paulo Reyes is my pick here. Now, moving on to the women's flyweight division, we have Jillian Robertson, who is 5-3, taking on Veronica Macedo, who is 5-2-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Macedo opened minus 140, Robertson even money. And right now, looking over at BetDSI, we're seeing Robertson minus 160, the comeback on Macedo at plus 130. So line flipped, more action coming in on Robertson. And now she is obviously the favorite, holding in a slight favorite here. It did climb a little higher. Now we're seeing some action back on Macedo as well. So I think at this point, we'll continue to see action floating in both ways, but most books are probably going to need Macedo to pull off the win, especially the ones that posted maybe the earlier numbers. But again, maybe not the case as we get closer to fight time, as more action comes in on both fighters. But that said, this is another good fight. I mean, Macedo hasn't had the best career thus far in the UFC. There was a little bit of buzz behind her before she, entered, and unfortunately for her, had a few setbacks over some quality competition in Evan Smith and Andrea Lee, of course, in her last fight. But there was, a lot to be expected from Macedo. And again, she just underperformed, I think, in both of those fights a little bit. Although she was competitive and had her moments at times in both fights, especially against the Lee fight. She hung in there, lost the decision. She was finished in the Evan Smith fight before that. But Macedo is a pretty good fighter. She's strong. She's definitely fast for the weight class. She's aggressive. She's just not great in any particular area. She's well-rounded, but not truly dominant anywhere. Like, she's not gonna, she has some good stand-up, don't get me wrong. I mean, she could be aggressive and she could hit with some power and she could come forward and present some problems for her opponents. But, I mean, her striking isn't something that it's just going to wow you. And then on the ground, again, her wrestling's okay, but she can get put on her back against most opponents as well. Her jiu-jitsu skill, she can throw up, some triangles and some sub attempts off her back as well. So she's okay, but she does like to play that leg lock game off her back. I should make a note of that. I think that's one of her favorite kind of techniques off her back as well. So she definitely has experience in all areas of the game. It's just, again, she's not going to blow you away with anything. Where Robertson, you can see a significant edge somewhere in this fight. And she has that wrestling base. She has that jiu-jitsu game that she can present some serious problems with Macedo. Her ground game is definitely her best attribute, but she is also developing her stand-up game, and she has a little bit of pop on her feet now, and she's getting more confidence in that area as well. So Robertson, I think, is not going to really want to play the stand-up game here against Macedo. I think Macedo's probably going to have the edge in that aspect of things, but Robertson can be respectable, at least on the feet a little bit. But I think the path to victory here is Robertson getting this fight to the ground and then utilizing her outstanding submission game and getting the win. Robertson, so far in the UFC, some mixed results, some up and down fights. I mean, she lost to Bueno Silva in her last fight by armbar, but you know what? If you look at it, that's not a bad loss. I mean, Silva's a special talented type of fighter, and losing to her by submission, we're going to see, especially as her career progresses, this is not going to be a really a horrible loss for Robertson. So I can respect that. But before that, she beat two solid opponents at Whitmire and McCann. And I think that, again, Robertson is at the point in her career. She's young enough. She's improving fight by fight. She has good training partners around her. So I think she's going to overmatch Macedo on the ground here, get the fight to the floor, then get it done probably early on by submission. So I do like Robertson. I do agree with the early action. I think the line was opened wrong, and Robertson is the rightful favorite. So the pick is Robertson, and I think she does probably get it done by submission. So if there's a submission prop out there that's available to you guys, I wouldn't blame you for taking a stab at Robertson by submission, because I think there probably is some value in that prop, the line that you're going to get out there with it. So that said, Robertson's a pick, probably a good fight. Again, I'm not underestimating Macedo. I think she'll probably perform relatively well here, but she's not going to be able to keep off her back, and I think Robertson's going to get it done. So that's the way I think it plays out.
The biggest difference between these two fighters is clearly the ground skill of Robertson. You saw her jump out and get two impressive submission victories to start her UFC career. She ran into a little bit of trouble in her last fight against a really talented Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter, but I think that she bounces right back here. Macedo is a talented fighter, but she got off to a rough start to her UFC career by fighting at bantamweight, getting out, just completely overwhelmed as an undersized bantamweight, and then she drops down to flyweight, and what do they throw her against? KGB Lee. And, she actually had an entertaining scrap there, one fight of the night, I believe. But, this is a very difficult, opponent again, in Robertson, somebody that has a fantastic ground game. So I expect Macedo is going to have the edge on the feet. But how long is it really going to stay on the feet? Robertson has a decent takedown game, and, Macedo really has been overwhelmed on the canvas so far. And Robertson is going to have possibly the best ground game of anybody she's faced so far in the UFC, and she's already had issues on the ground. So, Macedo is an intriguing fighter, but she has really had some tough matchups to start her UFC career, and I think, it's not going to be any easier this time around. So, I think Macedo will win early stand-up exchanges, but the second this goes to the floor, Robertson's going to take over. She is better in every way on the ground than Macedo. So my pick's going to be Jillian Robertson. I think that she gets a submission probably early in the fight, maybe even the first round. Now moving on and dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Daniel Tamer, who is 6-2, taking on Chris Fishgold, who is 17-2-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Tamer open -160, the comeback on Fishgold at +120. Significant movement in this fight, as right now we're seeing Fishgold over at BetDSI as a favorite. He's coming in around -250, the comeback +195 on Tamer. So line flipped, more action coming in Fishgold's way. And you know what? The bottom line, let's get into it right away. It's Tamer's cardio. A lot of people don't believe in him, man. I mean, he's had two difficult fights so far in the UFC. You got to give him credit. The UFC didn't throw him a bone. They gave him Danny Henry and Julio Arce, and both those fighters are definitely solid guys that can push people to the limit and have been very impressive in the UFC thus far. So, Daniel Tamer, unfortunately, hasn't had the success his brother has. David Tamer is an excellent fighter. He just recently suffered a setback in his own career. That's unfortunate for him, but man, what a fighter he is. And a lot of similarities can be said to this Tamer, Daniel here. I mean, the guy is an excellent striker. He's got big power on the feet. He's got a lot of potential. He's just still a little too raw, in my opinion. And his cardio, obviously, again, is a big problem. So as the fight progresses, if he doesn't get his opponents out of there early on, I mean, he does tend to start, letting up on the takedown defense a little bit. And he gets put on his back. He tries to scrap. After that, it's just a whole nother fight. If your cardio is not up to par, I don't care how talented you are, you're not the same fighter when you're tired. And that's a problem Tamer seems to have. And, and that's why he blows fights. So in this situation here against Fishgold, he's facing another very solid fighter. I mean, again, the significance of the line movement here is because Fishgold is an established veteran. Even though he did come into the UFC and get knocked out, unfortunately, he got finished by Cater in his debut. He was looking pretty good in that fight, though, before that. I mean, he was very impressive. And Fishgold, beyond his UFC debut over a very excellent fighter in Cater, if you look at his UFC or his Cage Warriors career, rather, before he made the UFC debut, it's been very impressive. He's fought a lot of solid competition, finished a lot of of fighters out there. And then he's also been tested. He's been 5 rounds before as well. So there's a lot of established, credible opponents that Fishgold's already been through. And Tamer, like I said, is far more raw. So Fishgold's a very well-rounded fighter. He's game in every aspect of it. I mean, his stand-up is game. His wrestling, his ground game, every aspect of the fight is good. Now, of course, he can be hurt. We saw that again in his debut a little bit. So Tamer is going to be dangerous early on. Fishgold has to be cautious. He has to fight smart. But as the fight progresses, if Fishgold can last and survive the early onslaught that Tamer throws at him, it's obvious that he should be able to take over, and he should be able to probably get this fight to the ground and then just control it, either win a decision, kind of grind it out the rest of the way, or even possibly and probably finish Tamer as it progresses as well. So Fishgold's just a level ahead right now. And it's unfortunate for Tamer because, I mean, he's probably going to have 3 straight losses in the UFC and maybe he gets cut right away. And again, I think the guy definitely has potential, but maybe that's what he needs. Maybe he needs to get outside of the UFC, go on a more level playing field, put a nice little run together, and then come back. We'll see. I think that's probably going to be his exit papers, though, after this fight, because I think Fishgold is going to get the win here. So that said, watch at the betting window. I mean, laying 2.5 to 1 over that kind of power early on where the number is now, it's a little dangerous. So I'm not saying go out there and just go crazy on Fishgold. You definitely got to respect Tamer's ability and power early on, but make no mistake, I still think Fishgold's going to probably win this fight because he's just the better fighter right now. So he's my pick. And again, I don't blame all the people that came in early on at that price and gobbled up that plus money and, and even that slight, favorite money that they were able to grab at such a low price. I think there was some good value there and you guys did good things. So congrats to the people that got in early and let's see how this one plays out.
Even though these guys are 0-3 combined in their UFC careers, I mean, you look at who they fought and, you can understand it. I mean, with Tamer taking on, Danny Henry and Julio Arce and, with Fishgold taking on Calvin Kattar. I mean, all 3 of those guys that they've lost to are talented UFC featherweights. So, definitely no shame in losing those fights. Granted, they both had, some serious issues, but Fishgold was looking good in his fight. And then he got, Kattar made some good adjustments. Tamer looked good in the early parts of his fights too, but I mean, this guy just has no gas tank whatsoever. That's the biggest problem is Tamer seems like the type of fighter does not fight like his brother, and his brother most recently didn't fight very well either, finally. Tamer just does not have good conditioning. He slows down drastically. He doesn't really have that good of a chin either. So I'm really concerned about him here. If Tamer does not knock Fishgold out in the first 5 minutes, I don't see how he could possibly win. So honestly, if you're betting on Daniel Tamer for this fight, don't bet on him to win. Bet on him to win, like, by stoppage, by knockout, almost certainly. The only way he wins by submission is if he hurts Fishgold and jumps on something for a submission victory. So, pick him to win inside the distance or something. Just, you'll increase your odds. Cause I just don't see a way that Daniel Tamer wins this fight by, decision. Chris Fishgold pushes a high pace. Chris Fishgold has excellent conditioning. He's gone 5 rounds before. Fishgold is way more experienced. So, I mean, the longer this fight goes, the worse it's going to be for Tamer. So if Tamer wins, it's going to be early. He's going to have to catch Fishgold with something nasty. But other than that, Fishgold's going to out-grapple him. And I think as the fight wears on, he'll probably outstrike Tamer as Tamer's, just ability to react and respond in the striking exchanges gets worse and worse due to his exhaustion. I think he's honestly got some of the worst cardio of any fighter 155 pounds and lower that I've ever seen. So, that's not something that you want to be known for, but, just conditioning is not, seems to be a focal point of his training. So, the longer this fight goes, the more I like Fishgold. So, like I said, multiple times here, unless he gets caught, Fishgold should win this fight. So, I'm picking Fishgold to win. He probably wins by stoppage in the 2nd or 3rd round. So, I really like Fishgold. Now, moving on to the main event of the preliminary card, we have, Dwight Grant, who is 8-2, taking on Carlo Pedersoli Jr., who is 11-2. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Pedersoli Jr. opened -160. The comeback on Grant +120. Right now, what you're seeing over at BetDSI is currently Peter Solly at minus 150, the comeback plus 120 on Grant. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. Solid opener, stayed about ballpark to where it opened, and it's going to probably continue to stay around that spot as well. Because Peter Solly should be the slight favorite coming into this fight. I mean, not for athleticism, not for potential. I mean, because that's where definitely Grant has the check marks in this fight. I mean, the speed, the explosiveness, just the overall ability. I mean, Grant is by far the better athlete in this fight. He'd be the more explosive fighter. He's got, a win in the Contender Series that kind of sent him to the UFC debut against Otto. And then that was the lackluster performance that, against Otto that kind of let everybody down. Grant was expected to do some really good things, and he just didn't really put his foot on the gas long enough to, to make that fight his, really, more so than anything. So that's the issue with Grant. Again, he shows some inexperience on that level a little bit against a very game opponent. And Peter Solly has a lot of similarities, I think. I mean, he's a very experienced veteran as well, solid in all aspects of the game. He will put his foot on the gas, and that's where the difference is here. I think Peter Solly's going to be a little bit more consistent, he'll flow a little bit better with every aspect of his MMA game, despite Grant's athleticism and some of the edges he might have as far as like length and like I said, I mean, just overall attributes. It's definitely on Grant's side, natural ability, but Peter Solly's the one that's has a better, definitely more complete MMA game overall. So I think Peter Solly's going to end up just pushing a higher pace overall, kind of wearing on Grant, maybe slowing this fight down a little bit, making it an ugly type of fight. On the feet, though, it should be close. Again, Peter Solly stays a little bit busier than Grant does. He's got a good kicking game. He goes to the body, digs in there well. But what it is, Peter Solly also mixes up and flows into his wrestling pretty decent as well. So I think he's going to bounce back. I know he got smoked by Oliveira in his last fight, so he's going to bounce back here and look to get a win over a game opponent in Grant. And again, a rising kind of prospect, or at least we thought, even though he's 34 years old. I mean, Grant in the MMA years, obviously, he's still a young gun as far as that aspect goes. But he has to get the W here, and he has to be impressive and get it done. And I just don't think he will. I don't trust him enough. I think that, again, if he goes out here and just smokes Peter Solly and gets him out of there right away, I'm not going to be shocked. I mean, I think the guy definitely has that kind of potential, but will he do it? I don't know, man. I think Peter Solly's just too much for him at this point. I think he's too experienced, and he's just a little bit too solid for him. So I think Peter Solly's chin holds up here, and if it does, he probably ends up getting the win here over Grant. So close fight, not anything I really truly have a lot of confidence in, but I am going to lean a little bit more towards Peter Solly in this fight.
Yeah, based on pure striking credentials and everything, you'd favor Grant easily in this fight, you would think, because he has a solid kickboxing ability, and he's showcased it, and he has the capability of, that athleticism and power to take people out on the feet. But man, that UFC debut in Milwaukee against Zach Otto, he could not have laid a bigger egg. I mean, he came in as a huge favorite, and it was atrocious. He just could not pull the trigger in that fight. It was embarrassing. Otto was fighting for his UFC life, and he had no business winning striking exchanges with Grant. And Otto just kept pressing forward, and it was ugly. And Otto was like grinding this and looking for takedowns, and Grant just refused to engage and basically gave the fight away. I mean, it was on a platter for him. All he had to do was just throw, just pull the trigger, and he couldn't do it. So how can I possibly trust him to do that against somebody that's actually going to be pushing a little bit more of a pace, in Peter Solly, who's more aggressive, who is going to be looking to take this fight to the ground, to push it into the clinch, to, push the pace on the feet. So yeah, Dwight Grant, as capable as he is of finishing fights quickly, of landing that big shot, I just can't trust him at this point. Plus, he tried to return, and have a quick turnaround from that embarrassing loss and, last month, but he, was ruled out, for facing Chance Rencounter. The commission said he had an eye injury. So this is a month later, and he's back again. So I'm very intrigued. Is it that much better? So Is he going to be competing, with a bit of an injury here? So, I just don't trust Dwight Grant. I think I'm honestly shocked that this is going to be the headlining fight on ESPN2 because, especially after the performance Dwight Grant had the last time around, that the UFC is putting him in a position to be in the fight that sells people to switch over to the ESPN Plus streaming service. So, honestly, it's kind of shocking to me. It's surprising that he's given another opportunity like this. I would be opening the card with him after the fight he had against Otto in his UFC debut. But maybe the UFC believes in him enough based on what he did on the Contender Series. So we'll see what happens. But, I just have a little bit more faith in Carlo Pedersoli Jr. at this point. So I'm going to have to pick him to win. Now, moving on to the main card on ESPN Plus, we have a light heavyweight contest between Magomed Ankalaev, who is 10-1, and Klidson Abreu, who is 17-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
And Ankalaev opened minus 245, the comeback on Abreu plus 175. Right now looking over at BetDSI, it is currently minus 205 for Ankalaev, the comeback on Abreu at plus 165. So more action coming in on the dog a little bit here, but nothing drastic. Action going to flow in on Ankalaev, and it's going to continue to do so as well. I mean, the guy is definitely a very solid fighter. Ankalaev is. So far in the UFC, he has been nothing but impressive in my opinion, even though he suffered that setback, that crazy submission loss with like a few seconds to go in his debut against Paul Craig. That was ridiculous because the guy was cruising to a decision. So that is a head scratcher, and you got to definitely keep that in mind. But I don't know. Like I said, that was just kind of almost flukish there at that point. But he's looked in the rest of his time in the octagon. He's looked great. I mean, the guy is definitely a very complete fighter, very put together. He could beat you on the feet. He obviously has a good takedown and wrestling and grappling game to go along with it. He's got good pressure on the ground. He's got good ground and pound. He's got good top control, everything. I mean, if he gets taken down, he can be taken down. That's one issue I have seen with him. His takedown defense is solid overall, but he can be put on his back. The cool thing about it is he does have good reversals, and he usually, gets back on top and then starts working his game on top as well. So a lot of good things to like about Ankalaev. He's 10-1. Like I said, that one setback was that crazy flukish kind of, upset victory that Craig got him with. So outside of that, I mean, the guy's looked great in his career, but Abreu is going to be a tough challenge, man. When I was looking at this fight, obviously, if you just look at his resume and you see Abreu has, out of his 14 wins, he has 10 by submission. So you think, oh, this guy's just going to be a straight submission fighter. But after looking at him and researching him a little bit more, I was actually impressive, man. This guy is one of these submission fighters for sure, but he's actually pretty damn good on the feet as well. I mean, he's impressed me with the striking. I wasn't expecting to see him actually be that effective with the striking game. He's got big power. He's a southpaw on film, at least. I know the UFC has him listed as an orthodox fighter, but to me, I mean, obviously, you check him out. He's fighting more southpaw than anything else on the feet. And with that southpaw stance, he definitely can present some problems. And he, like I said, big power. He does utilize some good kicking game as well. And he's capable of pushing forward and then transitioning smoothly from his stand-up into a takedown attempt possibly. So I do like what I see from him. And then on the ground, he has very good, submission ability. Obviously, he transitions well. He has the ability to finish the fight, obviously, at any aspect. If he grabs your leg, if he grabs your arm, around your throat, he's definitely a threat everywhere it takes place. Now, he can be reversed, though. That's one thing with this guy as well. From top position, he has been reversed and put on his back from, being on top as well. So with Ankalaev having the ability to do that, that's something that if this fight does play out on the ground, I think we're going to possibly see some reversals back and forth here as well. So the ground edge, though, should go to Abreu overall. I think he's a little bit more dangerous as far as the pure submission aspect goes, especially, like I said, that little head scratcher of a submission loss that Ankalaev had. I mean, Abreu, if he gets the opportunity on the ground, he could probably look to finish this fight as well. So this is not going to be an easy fight. And I think that's why the early action did come in on Abreu, obviously, because again, this guy is a pretty complete fighter. I think he presents a lot of problems here, but it's hard to pick against Ankalaev as good as he's looked overall. If he doesn't get submitted or caught in this fight, I think he does probably win it on the cards. And I think the later this fight goes, the more it plays out a little bit, especially Abreu's taking this fight on a little bit shorter notice. I think Ankalaev probably ends up winning the decision if that's the case here, or maybe even finishes Abreu late in the fight. I trust Ankalaev's cardio a little bit more as well. So I know I just really pumped Abreu up a little bit, but as far as a pure pick goes, my head still says Ankalaev's going to do enough to win this fight, and I trust him just slightly more. Now, that means at the betting window, I would not lay that chalk. I would not bet Ankalaev here. I think it is a dog or pass situation with the ability that Abreu has shown me. I think he's definitely a threat in this fight. So the pick is Ankalaev at the betting window, though. Be careful.
Yeah, when I first saw that, Ankalaev was taking on a guy that was filling in for somebody else on short notice, I was like, oh man, he's going to have a cakewalk. But I mean, you look at Abreu's track record and, he's actually taken on some pretty tough competition. I mean, he, recently beat Viktor Nemkov, a solid Russian veteran. And then, earlier in his career, he actually, submitted Johnny Walker, who is currently on a nice little run in the UFC and making waves in the light heavyweight division. So, this is definitely a guy that you should not be sleeping on. Abreu clearly has some talent. And if Ankalaev can get caught by Paul Craig with 1 second remaining in the third round and submitted, Abreu is definitely capable of doing that. So, and as Nick mentioned, Abreu is not a one-trick pony. He's actually a pretty decent striker. He pushes a good pace on the feet. He has a little bit of power. He mixes it up pretty well. And then when the fight does go to the floor, he's definitely dangerous. But, I've noted, when he does lose, he's been knocked out on. So that is something to keep an eye on. Ankalaev has pretty decent ground and pound. His top position is very good. His grappling overall is good. Ankalaev is, I would expect, to be in top position with his wrestling, if and when this fight does go to the floor, and it should. And Ankalaev's an okay striker as well. So, I think that Ankalaev is probably going to have the edge here, especially with, having a full training camp and everything. And when this fight goes to the floor, he is going to be in top position. And while Abreu does have a dangerous submission game, I think that he's a little bit more dangerous if he's the one in the dominant positions, not quite as dangerous off of his back. So, unless Abreu's able to, reverse position or get a sweep or something, I think that Ankalaev will more often than not be in control of this fight. So, I'm going to side with Ankalaev. I think, that he has, a lot of intriguing potential, and, he is 1 second away from having an undefeated, MMA career right now. So, I think Ankalaev, continues his little bounce back after that first UFC misstep and, gets another victory under his belt. But, Abreu could pull this one out absolutely, because he is a lot more talented than, a lot of people might think. Now, dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have John Dodson, who is 20-10, taking on Peter Yan, who is 11-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Yan opened minus 350, the comeback on Dotson at plus 250. And right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's Yan minus 300, the comeback on Dotson at plus 235. Never easy setting a Dotson line, especially with him being kind of around this price, because, man, you got to respect Dotson in most cases, what the guy's accomplished. I mean, who he's fought in the flyweight division. I mean, now in a bantamweight division as well. I mean, just the pure talent, the pure power, the pure speed, the athleticism Dotson has. The guy's just a special, special talent. There's no doubt about it. And you're seeing him, as a plus 200 or so, underdog here at this spot, plus 235. So, that's definitely a rare thing to see with Dotson. But that being said, that just shows you the amount of respect people have for Yan out there. I mean, this guy is a tremendous fighter in all aspects. He came into the UFC again with some buzz and some hype behind him as well. And people were, thinking this guy can make a run. This guy's legit. And rightfully so. I mean, he's been nothing but impressive so far in the UFC, and the guy's a well-rounded fighter. I mean, in his last fight against Douglas Andrade, look what he did, man. I mean, Andrade is a very tough fighter. I mean, he has not gotten blown out like that by any fighter. I mean, the corner stopped the fight, and rightfully so. He was taking a beating in that fight. So that tells you what Peter Yan's capable of, man. I mean, this guy is just a beast everywhere the fight takes place, pushes a high pace. He's got obviously very good striking skill with a lot of power, finishing ability. He's got some wrestling ability to go along with it. If you try to take him down, he does have that kind of takedown defense that he sprawls back up quickly. He's hard to hold down. I mean, that could be said obviously with Dodson too. Dodson has tremendous takedown defense. So a lot of similarities with both these guys. It's just, honestly, it's going to come down to Jan is just going to be the bigger fighter. I think Dodson is going to be probably a little bit quicker, but Jan, I mean, he's pretty damn close. It's going to be a very competitive fight in that aspect as well, but Jan's going to land the harder punches. He's going to be the aggressor here. He's going to be the one pushing the higher pace. If this goes to the cards, which in likeliness, that's a good possibility. Jan, I think, wins on the cards. If this doesn't go to the cards, outside of that one fastball that Dodson can throw and definitely put anybody's lights out that I was talking about, I think Jan has the ability to maybe to finish Dodson. Dodson is a guy that, is very tough to finish. I know he's been out of all those fights in his career. I believe he's never been finished, but if anything at this point, at this stage, and with the momentum Jan has coming into this fight, that wouldn't be shocking, put it that way. But still, I mean, I still believe this fight probably goes to the cards. And if that's the case, it's basically Jan's aggressiveness that I think is going to win it. It'll be competitive. We cannot count Dodson out. So be careful again, betting this fight because Dodson's seen it all, man. I mean, he's fought best of the best, like I said. So even though Jan has a ton of talent and I think he's going to win this fight and he's just a special type of athlete, I still think Dodson's going to show up and you got to respect him. So the pick is Jan. Be careful if you're going to bet it.
Yeah. My main issue with John Dodson is if you've seen one John Dodson fight, you've seen them all. He's a guy that is going to be, on his bicycle, moving backwards, looking for an opportunity to land a big counter bomb and put his opponent's lights out. And if that doesn't happen, he's probably going to lose. It's been extremely frustrating. If you're a John Dodson fan, you have to be banging your head against the wall 90% of the time while he's fighting. Jordan Breen, who, a guy that I have a lot of respect for, had one of the most brutally honest breakdowns of John Dodson's UFC career. He said, this was back in March of last year, but he said, in 19 years of loving and watching this sport, I have never seen anyone consistently do less with more than Don Johnson. What an upsetting, enigmatic waste. The dude is one of the biggest pound for pound punchers in the history of the sport, nearly unparalleled athlete, one of the greatest takedown defenders I've ever seen. And all he wants to do is screw around, stick his tongue out, and do backflips. And it's true. I mean, he's a goofball. Look at his fighter picture for this. I mean, he's growing his hair out, and he looks like a complete goof in his UFC profile right now. And I just don't know what this guy is doing. He was this close to being the flyweight champion of the world in his first fight against Demetrius Johnson. He had him on the ropes. After landing some huge shots on him in the first 2 rounds. But couldn't put him away. And then, the rest is history. He's had his moments since moving up to the bantamweight division, but for the most part, he's just been undersized and, still relying on that power. And the power has translated, but if you're not active and you're not throwing enough, if you're not going to knock out your opponent every time you step in the cage, you're probably going to lose a decision. And Peter Yan is an extremely well-rounded fighter that is going to be pushing a high tempo, and John Dodson is not going to win a decision here. The only way Dodson wins is if that big bomb lands and he puts Peter Yan out, because otherwise Peter Yan is going to be winning every other second of this fight as John Dodson moves backward and looks for the opportunity to land the big shot. So I think Peter Yan convincingly wins every single round unless John Dodson knocks him out. And I just think that's unlikely. Jan has been tremendous so far in his UFC run. This is a good test for him to see where he's at, against a top 15 bantamweight. And, I think Jan passes that test with flying colors. I really think that this guy could be a future title contender for sure. So, Peter Yan's going to be my pick. I think that he wins a one-sided unanimous decision. Now, moving down to the women's 125-pound division, we have Liz Carmouche, who is 11-6, taking on Lucy Pudilova, who is 8-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Carmouche open minus 185, the comeback, and Pudilova plus 145. And right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's Carmouche minus 140, the comeback, plus 110 on Pudilova. Kind of a tough one, man. Carmouche, obviously, another very game experienced fighter. fought the best of the best so far in her UFC career. I mean, there's nothing but respect to her. Most of those fights have took place in the bantamweight division, but since she's dropped down to the flyweight division and the door open for the flyweights to come in, she's actually looked pretty decent as well. Her setback was against Alexis Davis. That was a very close fight that could realistically went either way as well. So there's a lot to like about her. And of course, her best attribute is obviously her ground game. I mean, her wrestling is where it's at for Carmouche. She's usually has the ability to get the fight to the ground, control her opponents, and then just dominate them on the ground, typically with her ground and pound. She's got some offensive submission skill to go along with it. I mean, let's not forget, just a side note, I mean, how close she actually was to defeating Ronda Rousey with that rear naked choker, Leon. That was pretty impressive. Obviously it didn't play out that way and she got beat after that, but still, I mean, that's always going to be kind of a spot that we all remember. I mean, that was a very famous moment, I think, in Carmouche's history. So that's the type of fighter she is. She almost beat a game in her prime type of, the highest point of her career, Ronda Rousey, and almost put off a huge upset back then. So, that's the kind of ground potential she has overall. And then her stand-up has definitely improved to the point where she has a little bit of power. She can be aggressive and do some damage on the feet a little bit as well. So she is a very complete fighter. And she's going to be game anywhere the fight takes place for sure. But against Pudilova, her game plan is definitely going to be to take this fight to the ground and try to, again, utilize her ground and pound and control at least. Because Pudilova is moving down to the flyweight division. She's going to be big for the flyweight division. She's going to be strong. Obviously, she's going to have some length. And man, she's a warrior. So far in the UFC, that's all we've seen from this girl. I mean, she's put on some awesome performances. Her last fight against Aldana was ridiculous. I mean, what a war that was. These girls were just going at it. I mean, giving it all they had and just putting a beating on each other. I mean, that's the type of warrior you're going to get from Pudilova. I think if she gets in this kind of fight against Carmouche, she's going to win that fight. I mean, if it turns into a stand-up war with Pudilova's length, then I think her overall ability to just put it on fighters. I mean, Carmouche is not going to want to tangle in that aspect of things. She's going to want to get this fight, like I said, to the floor. So this is tough. I've been kind of going back and forth because I am curious to see Pudilova's takedown defense continues to improve. If that's the case, she's going to win this fight. So it all boils down to me. Can Carmouche get her down and can she control the fight on the ground without Pudilova giving her some fits there? I'm going to side with Pudilova a little bit more. I just think that she probably does find a way to do some damage along the way and keep this fight upright, to use her strength and her takedown defense. Hopefully he's improved enough. Now, again, I'm not going to know. So, they get in there and this fight plays out a little bit, obviously, and see how Carmouche does. But I think from the improvement that we've seen in Pudilova's game, I'm going to trust her enough here to justify a pick her way. So I just think, like I said, I think at this point of her career, she's 24 years old. She has more upside. I think she has that warrior mentality. She's going to come in here and keeps this fight upright. She's going to win. So that's why I'm leaning that way. It's not going to be an easy fight though, because again, Carmouche, her wrestling is going to be key here. And I think she's very capable of, putting Pudilova possibly on her back and doing what she does best. But with that said, again, at the betting window where it's at right now, it's a dog or pass situation, no doubt about it. I mean, like I said, I'm leaning and I'm actually picking Pudilova straight out. So my money would go her way. I would not lay the chalk on Carmouche despite her having the wrestling advantage in this fight. So the pick is Pudilova. Hopefully it's a good fight.
I expect this to be an entertaining fight, but Liz Carmouche has a very obvious path to victory. Now, if you look at the stats, they say that Lucy Pudilova has a 78% takedown defense, which is insane. But then you look who she's fought. And she's primarily taken on people that wanted to keep the fight standing or people that did not have very good ability to take fights to the floor. So I think that statistic is definitely skewed right now because it includes 4 UFC fights against, people that wanted to push the fight into the fence, or Sarah Morris, who really doesn't have very good offensive takedown ability whatsoever. And she's the only one that would honestly want to take the fight to the floor, or a stand-up fight against Irene Aldana. So I think that Liz Carmouche is by far the best wrestler and the best ability to take the fight to the floor that Pudilova's faced thus far in her UFC career. On the feet, Pudilova should have a slight edge, although I will say that Liz Carmouche has improved her offensive striking a little bit. I mean, she's not a world beater by any means, but she at least has not been going out there and embarrassing herself on the feet in her fights. So I think she's definitely getting better in that department. She has a little bit of pop in her hands. But Pudilova will probably win if this fight stays standing. So if I'm Liz Carmouche, I'm looking to push this fight into the fence, to drag this fight to the floor. And when she's on the canvas, Carmouche can be very dangerous, whether it's with submissions. She has pretty decent offensive submissions from top position. And Carmouche has some excellent ground and pound. She can really dish out some damage from top position. So, I'm a fan of Liz Carmouche. I think that the move to 125 has definitely revitalized her career a little bit. And I think that she's a contender at 125 pounds. Pudilova dropping down is intriguing, but I still think that, she is got a ways to go. There is barely anybody fighting at the women 135 pound weight class right now. And so that's why she was ranked number 14 in there. I mean, they only have like 16 or 18 fighters or something like that. So you had to rank her. But, Liz Carmouche, 125 is actually starting to get pretty crowded. And right now she's number 6 and she's earned that ranking. She's had some quality victories. So I think, Liz Carmouche gets this fight to the floor. I think that she does secure top position. I don't know if she'll be able to get a finish, but I think that she clearly does enough to win at least 2 out of 3 rounds and take a decision. So I think the grappling and top position is going to be key. And I think Liz Carmouche is able to secure that. Now, moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have John Vellante, who is 17-10, taking on Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, who is 12-2 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick.
Oleksiejczuk opened -210. The comeback of Vellante at +160. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's currently Oleksiejczuk -200. The comeback on Vellante +160. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this fight because Vellante just straight out frustrates me. Obviously, there is 2 action coming into this fight. Line staying kind of the same. You know what? Hard to trust Vellante at the betting window in the past as well. It will continue to do that as long as he's on the UFC roster or anybody matches him up, even if he's not. I mean, when you put a line on Vellante, it's tough because you don't know what you're going to get from him. The guy has a ton of potential. Obviously, he's a very experienced fighter, faced a lot of good competition, but it's his fight IQ, it's his conditioning at times. It just lets you down. I mean, I think the guy does have a lot of power. He can present a lot of problems for, some tough and decent competition in the light heavyweight division. It's just unfortunate for him. I mean, he's involved in far too many close decisions. He don't put his foot on the gas when he has to. He's too hittable at times. He does have a pretty decent chin. He has been knocked out 4 times. But considering that, I think he does absorb punishment relatively well, but it's the accumulation of shots a lot of times that finally gets to him. So, I mean, he just absorbs way too much punishment, but he can dish it out. He does have some power in the feet. Excellent takedown defense overall throughout his career. So you're not going to take the guy down. A lot of good things to like about Vellante, but again, his IQ and his conditioning are disappointments. So you cannot trust this guy at the betting window. And those of you guys that bet him in the past, you could totally relate to what I'm saying. That being said, Oleksiejczuk looks like a very promising fighter. I mean, age 23, coming in, facing a very dangerous opponent in Roundtree, and he performed better than most of us thought he would in that spot. So he obviously performing at a high level right away. He has been out over a year. He was suspended for banned substance, so we'll see how he performs, in his second fight back since then with the suspension coming off that. You always have to, approach that with a little bit of caution. But overall, from the skill that we've seen from this guy, again, 23 years old, he's developing his game. He's a pretty well-rounded fighter as it is. Now, of course, in the wrestling aspect of things, it's going to be very difficult for him to take Vellante down because Vellante obviously has good takedown defense, as I mentioned. So more likely than anything, this fight stays on the feet. And on the feet, I think it's going to be competitive to a certain extent, but Vellante's defense is going to be the one that lets him down a little bit. And Oleksiejczuk, I think, is going to have more success as the fight progresses, especially. So I think Oleksiejczuk can put together some combinations as the fight progresses again and probably do enough damage to maybe even get Vellante out of there. If not, obviously, if it's the scorecards, it might be fairly competitive because Vellante seemed to be, but I think Oleksiejczuk still pulls away enough and makes it clear that he ends up winning this fight as well. So I do like Oleksiejczuk in this fight. I think he's going to get a solid win over a very decent opponent, I guess you could say, with Vellante, no matter how frustrating he is. But Oleksiejczuk is definitely, I think, the one that has more upside in this spot, and he is capable of pulling out this win. So it might not be the easiest fight, but I think he gets it done.
Yeah, John Vellante has always been a fighter that has been frustrating to follow. I mean, from the time he debuted in Strikeforce and immediately lost to Chad Griggs and Lorenz Larkin, to his run in the UFC where, at times he's looked great, like his wins over Corey Anderson, and then plenty of other times he's just looked like hot garbage against, the likes of Sam Alvey. So, Vellante he is so tough to rely on because, he's got some power. He's got some decent striking ability. He has some wrestling ability, but he doesn't have a great chin. He doesn't have great defense. He doesn't have the best cardio. He's hittable. Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, he's not the greatest fighter. But you saw in his UFC debut which got overturned to a no contest, his opponent came out really aggressive, Roundtree, and tried to take his head off and wasn't able to do it. And then he got really tired, and Oleksiejczuk was able to take advantage of that and win the next 2 rounds and take a decision. So I think this time around, Vellante, he's historically been a decent starter. I think that I wouldn't be shocked to see Vellante win the early parts of this fight, but Vellante also historically has had some cardio issues, like, when he won early against Fabio Maldonado and then completely gassed out and lost the next 2 rounds in Brazil. So, him coming all the way over to Europe could be an issue. Maybe he has a little bit of jet lag, starts strong, fades, and Oleksiejczuk takes over. That's kind of how I view this fight. I think Oleksiejczuk isn't quite as good as Vellante in terms of his wrestling, in terms of punching power, in terms of pure striking ability, but Oleksiejczuk does have better cardio, and Oleksiejczuk can push a decent pace, and I think he can wear Vellante down a little bit. And I think Vellante starts strong and then fades, and Oleksiejczuk takes over. I don't know if Oleksiejczuk gets a finish, but I do think he can win the decision here. So I'm going to side with Oleksiejczuk, mainly because of my lack of trust in Gian Vellante. Now moving all the way up to the heavyweight division, we have Stefan Struve, who is 28-11, taking on Marcos Rogerio de Lima, who is 16-6-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmakers' perspective on this one?
This fight opened exactly a pick on -120 either way. Struve -120, de Lima -120. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's -115 either way, exactly a pick 'em. So line margins have obviously tightened up a little bit, but there is two-way action coming into this fight. It'll continue to flip back and forth, I think, a little bit, as it has already. And this is a tough fight. I mean, again, better mixed martial artist, by far Struve. Better resume overall, by far Struve. I mean, physical attributes, Struve is going to be huge compared to Lima. So there is definitely a lot to like about Struve in this fight. The problem is, Struve is, for me, he has been chinny. I mean, throughout his career, obviously he's been knocked out, I believe, 7 times, and he is capable of being put on his back and controlled on the back. And then obviously you could drop some ground and pound, and even, if you obviously have enough power, get him out of there on the ground as well. So that's his kryptonite. But Struve on the feet has that length, has that skill, has good technical ability, has enough power to put people out and really do some damage offensively as well. Has that submission game to go along with it. I mean, on the ground, if you put him on his back, you definitely have to be cautious. With those long limbs, he does have some technique. He could throw up some triangles, some arm bars. He can get you in some trouble. He can wrap you up. I mean, the guy definitely has some skill. But that being said, De Lima has shown a little bit of promise lately. I mean, there's been a lot of, I think, respect towards De Lima's power throughout his UFC career, especially light heavyweight. Now that he's moved up to heavyweight, obviously that's, still the case a little bit. You're always going to respect De Lima's power, but it's his overall ability now that's getting a little bit better. Now he has the ability, obviously shown, to get to the floor, fight a little bit smarter. His conditioning, there's been a lot of issues, in my opinion, with him in the past. He's been one of these guys that is a little bit of a front runner as well. And I kind of was questioning his conditioning and questioning his overall fight IQ. And there's, like I said, he was just one of these guys that I don't totally trust overall. He's a flawed fighter, defensively especially. But in his last fight against Wierzorek, he ended up looking really good. I mean, he did what he had to do in that fight. He fought a complete fight, went the distance. He showed a lot of good attributes in that fight, and he was a lot more comfortable. So I think this move up to heavyweight is really going to do him some good. And he does have a blueprint to beat Struve. It's catch that chin if he can blast him with power, or get the takedowns and avoid the submission game of Struve as well. And I think he's capable of doing both here. But again, the trust factor here. Can De Lima maybe fall into a triangle choke, or will he get subbed off his back? when he has Struve on his back, I should say. Will Struve sub him off his back? I mean, there's a lot of question marks here as well. So this is definitely a pick-up type of fight because I think you just can't trust either guy all that well in this spot. But despite the length and the size and the problems that Struve possesses, I think at this point right now, I still trust and I like what I see from De Lima. And I'm even surprised I'm saying that myself. But again, obviously you could tell it's not a confident pick. But I think De Lima can probably get this to the floor if he can avoid those subs and again, do some damage, possibly get Struve out of there. So I'm going to slightly lean towards De Lima. But again, I'm going to throw this out there as a disclaimer. Always check out our MMAOddsBreaker.com stat picks. After the weigh-ins, a lot of times we might, on a fence fight like this, when we're going kind of back and forth, we might end up switching a pick. So that will be our final selections. But for the most part, picks stay the same. But still, make sure you check out MMAOddsBreaker.com and our stat picks by fight day. So that said, right now I'm picking De Lima to win this fight. I just think that right now the timing is good for him to come in and pull off probably the best win of his career.
And I'm going to come in the other way. De Lima, he is a big, physical, powerful fighter, but he's also flawed. He is capable of taking fights to the floor, but I mean, he's given up at least 10 inches in height here against Stefan Struve. Struve, with De Lima having fought at light heavyweight for most of his career, and Struve right now, he is cutting a significant amount of weight to make heavyweight. I know Struve's on a 3-fight losing streak, but, it was against pretty top competition like Tybura, Arlovsky. And De Lima's just not at that level. I mean, this is a guy with a little bit of power, with a little bit of ability to take fights to the floor. But I think Stefan Struve can keep this fight upright if he wants. He doesn't have the best takedown defense, but he is very big and he's getting stronger. Struve, he's always going to be flawed in that, he never really learned to utilize his height to, the best of his ability. He's at his best when he's, exchanging in the pocket. He's got some power, but he also, doesn't have the greatest chin. So, if De Lima can get Struve on his back and keep him there, while Struve is dangerous off of his back with arm bars and triangle chokes due to his length, he also has been knocked out off when he's on his back. So, I'm concerned about that, but I think Struve can keep this fight upright, and I think Struve can win a decision or potentially knock De Lima out on the feet. Struve, the measurables are crazy here. Struve is at least 10 inches taller. He's got 10 inches in reach. His legs are way longer. If he can just utilize that distance a little bit better, I think that he actually will have some serious possibilities to perform very well in this contest. If Struve can jab, if he can work that kickboxing, especially the kicks from edge, De Lima's going to have a little bit of trouble getting inside. So I think Stefan Struve can get the job done. De Lima is not like a super scary heavyweight. I don't think Struve will be, overly concerned about pulling the trigger. So, I think that he bounces back. He ends his little miniature losing streak that he's been on right now. And, De Lima potentially gets, returned to the light heavyweight division because he's going to see what weight really looks like. So, Stefan Struve's going to be my pick here. Now, this takes us to the main event of the evening in the light heavyweight division. We have Jan Blachowicz, who is 23-7, taking on Thiago Santos, who is 20-6. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Santos opens -140, the comeback on Blachowicz, even money. And right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's -120 for Blachowicz, -110 for Santos. So line flip. Basically, pick 'em fight with a slight lead towards Blachowicz now, and it was the opposite. Pick 'em fight with a slight lead towards Santos early on as the opener goes. Another tough one to set me. Santos, it definitely has, in my opinion, climbed up that ladder really fast. What he's been able to do overall in the middleweight division now since moving up to light heavyweight is beyond me. Obviously, again, you want to talk about a guy with natural God-given skill or just the physique, the abilities. His physical attributes is just, like I said, God-given. He's long for the division. He's a beast. He fills out well for 185 or 205. Let's not forget this guy was actually fighting at welterweight at one point. How crazy is that? So he's another one of these freaks like Anthony Johnson that will never suspect that he ever competed in that light. So he fills off nicely. He's a strong guy. He's not going to be undersized here against a normal, I don't want to say, obviously sized light heavyweight in Blachowicz, but which has obviously been competing there for a while. So Santos is just, like I said, one of those freaks of nature with his God-given attributes. But that said, he also has some skill. I mean, he's a very dangerous striker. Man, those kicks are lethal that he throws. I mean, he's been coming on, and I've been doubting this guy throughout his career. I have to admit that. I mean, it's just because I think he's a flawed fighter in a lot of ways as well. I don't trust his chin. I think he's a bit chinny. I think in the past he showed some flaws with his ground game as well. He's been taken down, but he seemed to address a lot of that stuff, man. He's been in more wars. I mean, he's definitely improved and has, kind of gained my respect on different levels for sure, because his chin, he's holding up a little bit better in some wars. We've seen that with his takedown defense. He's not easy to hold down. He makes life miserable for some of these guys that are trying to get him to the ground as well. So I have to respect that, man. Santos is no easy out at all. So he earned this main event slot here for sure. But that said, I still think he is a little flawed. I mean, those problems that he has are still there. I mean, like I said, he's just on a roll because a lot of people can't just, take his physicality mixed with that technique that he has, and that skill. It's definitely a threat to a lot of people. So they just can't, they crumble under that pressure. So got to give credit for Santos. But that said, Blachowicz is a very game veteran in his own right. He has a lot of the same attributes. I mean, he's not, again, the kind of a physical freak that Santos is, in my opinion, even though they're going to be similar size, but Blachowicz is a very tough guy. I mean, he's not easy to stop. I mean, I think he's got a pretty solid chin overall for the most part. He's a very smart fighter. He has decent fight IQ. His conditioning overall is decent as well. He's got the better ground game of the two here as well. And he's got some underrated power on the feet. So I think this is going to be a barn burner. I think this is going to be one fight that either one of these guys could realistically knock each other out. In fact, I actually favor Blachowicz if it's going to be a knockout. Santos offensively is a little bit more dangerous. I think I trust Blachowicz's chin a little bit more, and I think he has enough power to crack that chin of Santos and put him out as well. Now, again, as the fight progresses, though, I think that there's going to be moments where Blachowicz could probably find a spot on the ground to end this as well. So I just think he is the more complete fighter, even though this is a very dangerous fight, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if Santos goes out there and floors him. I still think that you have to side with a better overall fighter. And in this case, it's honestly Blachowicz. I mean, he's performed really well. I think he's actually improved his last few fights. It's definitely been noticeable. I mean, you gotta respect what he's done as well. So a lot to like. He has momentum on his side. Both these guys obviously do. They both have a lot of confidence going for them right now. So it should be a great fight, a good main event. I'm really looking forward to it. But in my opinion, I have to side with the better fighter, and that's Blachowicz. So that's my pick. And at the current price right now around Pick'em, there might be a little bit of value his way still as well.
And I'm in complete agreement. I've been a guy that's been behind Thiago Santos during this run. I mean, he is a devastating striker. I mean, this guy has lethal kicks, good power in his hands. He has explosive power. He's quick. He's athletic. I mean, he is the complete package in terms of striking. I mean, he is a very, very dangerous fighter on the feet. But that's pretty much it. I mean, he doesn't have much of a ground game whatsoever. He's not nearly as dangerous if you're able to take away his weapons. And Jan Blachowicz is a talented striker in his own right. I mean, the guy has, had a great performance against Ilir Latifi early in his UFC career. And then he's actually stepped up his striking game in more recent fights. And what's really kind of set him apart and has allowed him to become one of the top light heavyweights on the roster has been the improvements to his ground game, getting fights to the floor, securing top position, and either looking for, submissions, ground and pound, whatever, or just riding out decisions from the top. Blachowicz is just a much more well-rounded fighter than Santos. I mean, you look at Santos's last fight, and I mean, it was an absolute barn burner against Manoa. But I mean, he was playing with fire that whole time, and he completely gassed himself out looking for the finish, almost got finished himself on multiple occasions. And it just so happened to be that he was the guy that landed that last big shot. But I mean, he puts himself in some seriously dangerous positions. And that is a big concern. Santos, he's not really going to be giving up much size here, even though Blachowicz is a little bit bigger. Blachowicz is definitely a natural 205 pounder. And Santos has, obviously, as Nick said, fought at lower weight classes, but, I don't think Santos isn't really giving up a whole lot of size, but, I do think that he'll be giving up some strength. And, when Blachowicz closes the distance here, and I do think that Blachowicz takes this fight to the floor, that's going to give him a huge edge. And also, Santos's conditioning is something you definitely have to question here. Now, obviously, he's going to gas out faster if he's going for the kill and just unloading everything, trying to end the fight like he did in the Manoa fight. So that hastened his, conditioning issues because, he looked fine, in a little bit of a longer, contest against Eric Anders that was also at light heavyweight. But, against Blachowicz, I just think that Blachowicz is going to be bigger, stronger. I think that Blachowicz has the better conditioning. I think Blachowicz has a better chin between the two of them. Santos does hit harder. Santos is more athletic and, mixes things up a little bit better. And he can live and die by his kicking game. So if Santos really gets his kicks going, that could be an issue. Like if he really lands some good leg kicks or, goes high when Blachowicz is thinking that something's coming low or to the body, that could definitely be an issue. But overall, I just really like the well-roundedness and of Blachowicz's game and the ability for him to go all 5 rounds if need be. I just think that he weathers that early storm from Santos and it either grinds this out or overwhelms Santos as Santos starts to slow down because, that technique starts to go out the window when Santos gets tired. If you watch the Manoa fight, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I like Jan Blachowicz here. I think that he does survive early and then he does get a finish at some point in maybe the second, but I would say at the worst, maybe the 4th round. So my pick is going to be Jan Blachowicz. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC on ESPN Plus 3. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to BetDSI. Good luck everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.